They laughed when she stepped into the arena with her worn-out clothes, a rusty old truck, and a nameless dog. She was the joke of the showcase, a washed-up veteran clinging to the last shreds of dignity. The whispers rippled through the crowd like wildfire, barely concealed behind manicured hands and designer sunglasses. "Is that a German shepherd or a wolf?" someone snickered. "More like a junkyard mutt," another replied. Grace Whittaker stood ramrod straight, her weathered face betraying no emotion as she guided Storm through the entrance gate. The jagged scar running down her right forearm caught the harsh arena lights, a permanent reminder of shrapnel that had nearly claimed her life in a distant desert. Her faded flannel shirt and dust-covered boots stood in stark contrast to the pristine handlers in their pressed suits and shining shoes. Storm padded silently beside her, his ash-gray coat bearing the subtle marks of old wounds. Unlike the primped and preened purebreds prancing around the ring, he moved with the quiet vigilance of a creature who had known real danger, not the manufactured tension of show rings and judging panels. The announcer's voice boomed overhead. "Next up from stall 29, Grace Whittaker and Storm!" The pause before the dog's name dripped with barely concealed derision. Chuck Redford, seated in the VIP section, leaned toward his associates with a satisfied smirk. "This should be entertaining," he whispered, raising his crystal water glass in mock salute. But as Grace looked down at Storm, something passed between them, an understanding forged in shared pain and midnight terrors. She placed her calloused hand gently on his head, and the German shepherd's amber eyes locked onto hers with unwavering focus. No one knew the extraordinary past she and the dog beside her carried, and when the music began, every mocking word would fall silent. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered boards of Whittaker Ranch as Grace moved methodically through her daily routine. At 59, her tall, lean frame still carried the disciplined posture of her military days, though time had etched deep lines around her eyes and turned her once dark hair to a steely gray. The ranch itself mirrored its owner, weathered but unyielding, worn down by elements yet refusing to crumble entirely. Inherited after her parents passed during her final deployment, the property sat on the outskirts of a small Texas town where gossip traveled faster than the dry summer wind. Grace had never planned on returning to Texas, much less to the childhood ranch that held so many complicated memories. As a combat medic in Afghanistan, she had found purpose in the chaos of war. Saving lives amid destruction had given her days clear meaning. But that was before the IED explosion that left her with a jagged scar running from wrist to elbow and nightmares that medication couldn't touch. Honorably discharged and haunted, she had returned to find herself a stranger in a world that had moved on without her. The ranch offered solitude, if not peace. Most days, Grace spoke to no one except Storm, and occasionally her 15-year-old granddaughter Lily, who lived with her since the tragic car accident that claimed her daughter's life 3 years ago. The girl was quiet, with a talent for sketching and an old soul's patience. Unlike her grandmother, Lily didn't wear her grief openly, but Grace recognized the shadows that sometimes darkened her young eyes, the same shadows that stared back at her from the bathroom mirror each morning. Storm hadn't always been Storm. 5 years earlier, he had been a nameless, nearly dead German shepherd that Grace discovered in a deep ravine after one of the worst summer storms in decades. Emaciated, covered in mud and bearing wounds that suggested both abuse and neglect, the dog had looked at Grace with eyes that reflected her own desolation. In that moment of recognition between broken souls, Grace made her first real decision since returning from war. This animal would not die alone in the mud. "I'm giving you a fighting chance," she had whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse as she lifted the heavy dog into her truck. "That's all either of us gets." She named him Storm, both for the tempest that brought them together and for the ferocity she sensed beneath his wounded exterior. Under her care, the German shepherd slowly regained his strength, though, like Grace, he carried visible scars and invisible wounds. What surprised her was his intelligence, the way he watched her, learned from her, and eventually saved her. The first time Grace experienced a severe PTSD episode in Storm's presence, she had fallen to the floor of the barn, gasping for breath as gunfire and explosions from years past detonated in her mind. When she finally regained awareness, she found herself curled on the ground with Storm pressed firmly against her chest, his steady heartbeat anchoring her to reality. Somehow, without training, the dog had recognized her distress and responded with exactly what she needed: pressure, presence, and unwavering calm. After that, Storm's attentiveness to Grace's condition only grew. He learned to wake her from nightmares before they reached their crescendo, nudging her firmly or licking her hand until her eyes opened. During flashbacks, he would place his paw on her knee or press his weight against her legs, grounding techniques that therapists had tried and failed to implement. When panic threatened to overwhelm her in town, too many people, too much noise, Storm would guide her back to the truck without command, creating a buffer between her and the overstimulating world. Across the county line, in a sprawling estate with manicured lawns and state-of-the-art kennel facilities, Chuck Redford represented everything Grace was not: wealthy, connected, and publicly respected. His reputation as one of Texas's premier dog breeders had earned him trophies, magazine features, and the admiration of elite social circles. At 62, Redford carried himself with the confident swagger of a man accustomed to deference, his expensive attire and flashy accessories broadcasting his success to anyone who encountered him. Few people knew that behind the polished gates of Redford Estate lay darkened rooms where dogs were bred not for shows but for fight rings. Fewer still knew about the connection between Chuck Redford and a certain military transport incident in Afghanistan that had been carefully classified and buried. Chuck's son, Travis, tall and lean with his father's calculating eyes but not quite his steel, stood to inherit the empire, both its gleaming facade and its shadowed operations. And then there was Cole Anderson, the quiet, observant veterinarian who had recently arrived in the county. At 35, his gentle hands and soft-spoken manner had quickly earned him the trust of local animal owners, though few noticed how his gaze lingered thoughtfully on the Redford kennels whenever he drove past, or how carefully he examined certain injuries on dogs brought to his clinic. What no one in town knew was that Cole was the estranged son of Jeremiah Cole, once a legendary dog trainer whose prize breeding program had mysteriously collapsed a decade ago, leaving the old man broken and forgotten. As the Texas summer burned on, these lives would collide in ways that would expose long-buried secrets and force each of them to confront the truth about themselves, about each other, and about a special German shepherd named Storm. The rumble of an expensive engine broke the morning quiet at Whitaker Ranch. Grace looked up from where she was repairing a fence post, immediately tensing at the intrusion. A gleaming black Ford F-350, polished to a mirror finish, kicked up dust as it rolled down her driveway. Behind it trailed a custom trailer emblazoned with Redford Estate in gold lettering, large enough to transport several show dogs in climate-controlled luxury. "Company," Grace muttered to Storm, who had already risen from his spot in the shade, ears alert and body tense. She wiped her hands on her worn jeans and straightened, the old military posture returning automatically. Her fingers unconsciously traced the scar on her forearm, a habit when she felt threatened. The truck door swung open and Chuck Redford emerged, his silk shirt strained against his substantial belly, and his ostrich leather boots had clearly never seen actual ranch work. On his hand, a gaudy ring caught the sunlight, momentarily blinding Grace. Behind him, Travis Redford stepped out, tall and lean, with a perpetual smirk that matched his designer sunglasses. "Well, if it isn't Grace Whitaker," Chuck called out, his voice carrying the confident boom of someone used to commanding attention. "Still keeping this place together with baling wire and prayers, I see?" Grace didn't respond. Years in the military had taught her that silence often revealed more than words. She simply nodded once, acknowledging his presence but offering nothing more. "Dad's being generous," Travis added, sweeping his gaze across the sagging fence line and weathered barn. "I'd say it's a losing battle. Some things are better torn down than fixed up." His smirk widened as he glanced meaningly at Storm, who stood quietly at Grace's side. From the porch, Lily watched the exchange, her slender fingers gripping her sketchbook tightly. Though only 15, she recognized the predatory nature of their visitors. The Redfords carried the same air as the school bullies who mocked her quiet ways. Confident that their cruelty would go unchallenged, Chuck reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a glossy pamphlet, extending it toward Grace. "The National Canine Showcase is happening next month in San Antonio. Best handlers and dogs from across the country." He paused, his smile not reaching his eyes. "They've opened let's call it a community division this year. Thought you might want to enter that mutt of yours." Grace took the pamphlet, her face betraying nothing as her eyes scanned the embossed lettering and images of immaculate show rings. "Honestly," Travis added, "they always need a few colorful locals to fill out the program. Gives the audience something to laugh at between the real competitors." Storm's ears flattened slightly as if he understood the insult. Grace placed her hand on his head, a gesture both protective and grounding. "That's quite a dog you have there," Chuck continued, his gaze growing more calculated as he studied Storm. "German Shepherd mix, is he? Looks like he's seen better days." "He's seen real days," Grace replied, her voice low but steady. "Not just show rings." Chuck's smile tightened. "Well, the invitation stands. Might be educational for you to see what actual champion bloodlines look like." He turned to head back to his truck, then paused. "Oh, and Grace, if you do come, try to wear something presentable. The photographers will be there, and we wouldn't want you embarrassing our county more than necessary." As the Redfords climbed back into their truck, Travis called out, "Good luck with that fence, and the dog. You'll need it for both." The truck roared to life, kicking up a deliberately large cloud of dust before turning around and heading back down the driveway. Grace stood motionless until the vehicle disappeared from sight, then looked down at the pamphlet in her hand. "Why would they invite you just to mock you?" Lily asked, having descended from the porch to stand beside her grandmother. The girl's voice was soft but indignant. Grace's weathered face gave nothing away. "They expect entertainment at my expense." Lily studied her grandmother's profile, noting the slight tightening around her eyes, the only visible sign of her anger. "Then you should go and show them they're wrong about you, about Storm." Inside the house, Grace placed the pamphlet on the kitchen table and sank into a chair. The thought of crowds, lights, noise, and judgmental stares sent a cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. Her hands began to tremble slightly, the first warning sign of an impending panic attack. Storm immediately moved closer, pressing his warm body against her leg. He placed his head in her lap, amber eyes looking up with unwavering focus. Grace began to stroke his fur mechanically, feeling her breathing slow as she counted each stroke. "I can't do crowds anymore, Lily," she said finally. "You know what happens." Lily sat across from her grandmother. "But Storm helps you. He always knows when it's starting, before even you do sometimes." Grace's thoughts drifted to the nights when nightmares gripped her, when the sound of distant thunder became mortar fire in her dreams. How many times had she awakened to find Storm already there, his weight against her chest bringing her back to the present? How often had his vigilance been the only thing that got her through a necessary trip to town? "Besides," Lily continued, "they think you'll never show up. That's why they invited you. Imagine their faces if you did. If you and Storm showed everyone what you can really do." Grace looked at her granddaughter's determined expression, recognizing the stubborn set of her jaw, a family trait that had skipped a generation. The girl had endured her own trauma, losing her mother and coming to live with a grandmother who struggled with invisible wounds. Yet here she was, still believing in possibilities. "What exactly do you think we can do?" Grace asked, a hint of weariness in her voice. Lily's face brightened. "I've been watching you train with him. The way he responds to you, it's like he can read your mind. None of those fancy show dogs can do what Storm does." She leaned forward eagerly. "You were a medic. You know about trauma. Storm knows about helping with trauma. Together, you could show people what really matters in a partnership between a person and a dog." Storm lifted his head at the change in Lily's tone, looking between the two humans with attentive eyes. "It's not that simple," Grace said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It never is," Lily agreed, wisdom beyond her years showing in her solemn expression. "But sometimes you have to walk through fire to get to the other side." Grace's hand stilled on Storm's head, walking through fire. She'd done that before, literally, pulling wounded soldiers from burning vehicles. The memories threatened to overwhelm her for a moment, but Storm pressed more firmly against her leg, and the flashback receded. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Grace pulled out an old wooden chest from under her bed. Inside lay her father's leather dog leash and collar, tools from a time when Whitaker Ranch had been known for its working dogs rather than its disrepair. The leather was cracked but solid, with simple, dignified craftsmanship that had endured decades. Grace held the items in her scarred hands, feeling the weight of legacy and loss. She thought of her daughter, of the life that war had stolen from her, of the granddaughter determinedly sketching dog training techniques in her room. She thought of Chuck Redford's smugness and Travis's cruel smile. But mostly she thought of Storm, who had appeared in her darkest hour and shown her that survival was still possible, even when it didn't seem worth the effort. "What do you think, boy?" she asked softly. Storm, who had been watching from the doorway, padded over and gently placed his paw on her knee. In the quiet Texas night, it felt like an answer. The following week found Grace in town, a rare occurrence that usually only happened when absolutely necessary. With Storm beside her, she parked her weathered truck outside Rasmussen's farm supply, steeling herself for the inevitable sensory overload of the small store. The bell jangled as she pushed open the door, and she winced slightly at the sound. Storm pressed closer to her leg, a silent reminder of his presence. "Just picking up some supplies," she murmured to him. "In and out." She moved efficiently through the aisles, grabbing dog food, mineral supplements, and leather conditioner for the old collar and leash. As she reached for a bottle of antiseptic ointment, a quiet voice spoke behind her. "That's a remarkable dog you have there, ma'am." Grace turned to find a man in his mid-30s observing Storm with professional interest. His chambray shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms tanned from outdoor work, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable with animals. "Cole Anderson," he said, extending his hand. "I am the new veterinarian in town." Grace hesitated before accepting the handshake. "Grace Whitaker." "I know," he replied with a small smile. "Word gets around in small towns. German Shepherd, right? But there's something distinctive about him. The way he's attuned to you is unusual." Storm watched the newcomer with alert but unthreatening attention, his posture relaxed but vigilant. "He's just a dog I found," Grace said, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. She started to move toward the checkout counter. Cole fell into step beside her. "With all due respect, Ms. Whitaker, that's not just a dog. I've worked with service animals, and even among trained dogs, that level of awareness is exceptional, especially in a rescue with no formal training." Grace placed her items on the counter, trying to ignore the curious stares from other customers who rarely saw her in town. "What's your point, Dr. Anderson?" "My point is that you've got something special there, and from what I understand, you might be showing him at the National Showcase next month." When Grace's eyes narrowed suspiciously, he added, "Small town, remember? I heard the Redfords paid you a visit." The cashier rang up Grace's purchases, eyeing the conversation with undisguised curiosity. Grace paid in cash and gathered her bags, nodding curtly to Cole before heading toward the door. To her annoyance, he followed her outside. "I don't mean to pry," Cole said, his voice lowering, "but I'd be careful around Chuck Redford. He doesn't issue invitations without a reason." Grace stopped beside her truck, studying the young veterinarian more carefully. There was something in his tone, a personal edge, that suggested more than professional concern. "Sounds like you have experience with him," she observed. A shadow crossed Cole's face. "Let's just say I've seen how he operates. If he invited you to that showcase, it's because he either wants to humiliate you or because he's worried about something." He glanced at Storm again. "May I ask where you found him?" Grace hesitated, then decided there was little harm in sharing. "Timber Ravine, about 5 years back, after that big summer storm. He was half dead, looked like he'd been abandoned or escaped from somewhere. No collar, no chip." Cool's expression sharpened with interest. 5 years ago. And the ravine area, you said?" "That's right. Why?" Instead of answering, Cole crouched down, meeting Storm at eye level. He didn't try to touch the dog, but spoke softly. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, boy?" Storm tilted his head, studying the veterinarian with intelligent eyes. After a moment, to Grace's surprise, Storm took a small step forward and gently sniffed Cole's extended hand. "He doesn't usually warm up to strangers," Grace said. Cole stood slowly. "I'd be happy to give him a checkup before the showcase, free of charge, just to make sure he's in top condition." "I'm not sure I'm going," Grace replied, loading her purchases into the truck. "But if you do," Cole persisted, "I'd like to help, and I'd be very interested to see how he performs." He pulled out a business card and offered it to her. "My clinic's just on the edge of town. Feel free to stop by any time." Grace took the card reflexively, still uncertain about the man's interest. As she and Storm drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror to see Kala watching them, an unreadable expression on his face. That night, as thunderstorms rolled across the Texas hills, Grace found herself once again in the grip of the past. The distant rumble became the echo of IEDs, and the flashes of lightning transformed into muzzle flares in her mind's eye. She sat bolt upright in bed, a scream caught in her throat, her body drenched in cold sweat. Storm was already there, pressing his weight against her, pulling her back to the present with his steady presence. As her breathing gradually slowed, Grace buried her face in his fur, breathing in his familiar scent. "It was a bad one tonight," she whispered. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows. A particularly loud crack of thunder made Grace flinch, but Storm remained steady, anchoring her to reality with his unwavering calm. Later, unable to return to sleep, Grace sat on the porch with Storm at her feet, watching lightning split the sky. Her mind drifted back to the night she had found him, a night not unlike this one. She had been in a dark place then. After 3 months back on U.S. soil, the nightmares had become unbearable. The memories of failed attempts to save her fellow soldiers, the constant replay of blood on her hands, and the screams of the wounded had driven her to the edge. That night, with thunder cracking overhead and rain turning the ground to mud, she had taken her father's old hunting rifle and walked out into the storm, unsure if she would return. It was then, soaked to the skin and numb with despair, that she had heard it, a faint whimper coming from the direction of Timber Ravine. Some remaining spark of the medic she had once been had responded automatically to the sound of pain. Following it through sheets of rain, she had found Storm, though he wasn't Storm then, just a wounded, emaciated German shepherd trapped on a narrow ledge, too injured to climb out. Looking at him now, strong and vigilant beside her, it was hard to reconcile the memory of that broken animal with the companion who had become her lifeline. She had saved him that night, but in truth, he had been saving her every day since. The next morning, Grace found Lily in the barn, brushing Storm and talking to him softly. The girl looked up as her grandmother approached, a determined expression on her young face. "I've been researching the showcase," Lily said without preamble. "We have 3 weeks to prepare. I've made a list of things Storm should learn." Grace sighed. "Lily, those shows are about bloodlines and breed standards. Storm is a rescue. He doesn't have papers." "There's a special exhibition category this year," Lily countered, "for service and therapy dogs. It's about what they can do, not where they came from." She held out her phone, showing Grace the showcase website. "And look, they're featuring veterans with service dogs." "That's you and Storm." Grace looked at the screen skeptically. "Storm isn't a trained service dog." "But he does everything a service dog does," Lily insisted. "He alerts to your panic attacks, helps with your nightmares, keeps you grounded in public. He just figured it out on his own instead of being taught." A small spark of possibility flickered in Grace's mind, but doubt quickly extinguished it. "I can't go up in front of all those people, Lily. You know what happens." "That's just it. Storm won't let it happen. He's never let you down before, has he?" The girl's eyes shone with certainty. "Besides, imagine how many other veterans might benefit if they saw what's possible, even with a rescue dog." Before Grace could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Looking out the barn door, she was surprised to see Cole Anderson's modest SUV pulling up. Storm's ears perked up, but he showed none of the wariness he typically displayed with strangers. "Dr. Anderson," Grace acknowledged as he approached the barn. "Something I can help you with?" Cole smiled apologetically. "I was in the area checking on the Mitchell Farms livestock and thought I'd stop by. I brought something that might interest you." He held up a weathered book. "It's an old manual on German Shepherd working lines and their unique capabilities. I thought it might be useful if you're considering the showcase." Lily stepped forward eagerly. "We were just talking about that. We're going to enter the service dog exhibition." Cole's eyes lit up. "It's perfect. Storm would excel in that category." He turned to Grace. "If you're open to it, I'd be happy to help you prepare. German Shepherds have some specific presentation points that judges look for, even in the service categories." Grace studied him, still uncertain about his motives. "You seem very invested in a dog you just met, Doctor." A shadow crossed Cole's face. "Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting to see a good handler and dog succeed at an event dominated by the Redfords." He hesitated, then added more softly, "And call me Cole, please. If we're going to work together, we might as well be on a first-name basis." As Lily excitedly began discussing training schedules with Cole, Grace felt a strange mix of apprehension and tentative hope. She looked down at Storm, who gazed back with calm assurance, as if to say they could face whatever came next, together. Over the next 2 weeks, Whitaker Ranch transformed into an unexpected training ground. Each morning began before dawn, with Grace and Storm working through increasingly complex routines under Cole's guidance. The veterinarian proved to be a knowledgeable coach, demonstrating a deep understanding of service dog protocols that went beyond his professional training. He showed Grace how to refine Storm's natural instincts into demonstrations that would impress showcase judges. "The key," Cole explained one morning as they worked in the makeshift arena Grace had created in the old corral, "is to highlight the bond between you. Most service dogs are impressive because they're following their training. Storm is extraordinary because he's responding to you, not just commands." Grace nodded, watching as Storm navigated an obstacle course designed to simulate crowded public spaces. "He's always been that way, even before we trained anything formal." Cole's eyes took on a distant look. "Some dogs just have it. An innate understanding that goes beyond training. My father used to say it was the mark of special bloodlines." "Your father trained dogs, too?" Lily asked, jotting notes in a spiral-bound notebook where she tracked Storm's progress. A shadow crossed Cole's face. "He did. He was one of the best until—" He trailed off, then quickly redirected. "Let's work on the panic attack response sequence again." As the training intensified, Grace found herself sharing more about her military experiences than she had with anyone since returning home. Cole never pushed, but his quiet attentiveness made it easier to explain how Storm had learned to recognize her triggers. "In Kannar Province, we were hit by an IED outside our field hospital," she told him one evening as they reviewed the day's progress. "I was triaging patients when it happened. The explosion took out half the building and sent shrapnel everywhere." She unconsciously rubbed the scar on her arm. "I still hear it sometimes, that specific sound of metal tearing through air. When I do, Storm knows before I even realize I'm slipping away." Cole nodded thoughtfully. "The showcase will have loud noises, crowds, unfamiliar dogs. It might trigger some of those responses." "I know," Grace acknowledged. "Part of me thinks this is insane." "And the other part?" She looked over to where Storm was playing gentle tug-of-war with Lily, the girl's laughter carrying across the yard. "The other part thinks maybe we need this, all of us." The quiet moment was interrupted by the rumble of an approaching vehicle. Grace tensed immediately, recognizing the sound of a powerful engine. Storm abandoned his game and trotted to her side, alert but calm. The black F-350 appeared around the bend, kicking up dust as it slowed to a stop. Travis Redford emerged, his usual smirk replaced by a more calculating expression. "Afternoon, Whitaker," he called, sauntering toward them. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Cole. "Dr. Anderson, interesting company you're keeping these days." Cole's posture stiffened slightly, but his voice remained even. "Just helping a client prepare for the showcase." Travis raised an eyebrow. "So you're actually going through with it? Bold choice." He turned his attention to Storm, studying the German shepherd with greater interest than before. "Dad said you'd never show up, but I told him not to underestimate military stubbornness." Grace stood perfectly still, the way she'd learned to do when confronted by threats in the field. "Did you need something, Travis?" He shrugged, all practiced nonchalance. "Just checking in, being neighborly." His gaze slid to the training equipment scattered around the corral. "Though I should warn you, the exhibition category is still judged by professionals. They can spot a backyard operation a mile away." "And they can spot a good dog even further," Cole interjected. Something flickered in Travis's eyes, a brief uncertainty before the arrogance reasserted itself. "We'll see about that." He started back toward his truck, then paused. "Oh, and Grace? I'd be careful driving that old truck of yours to San Antonio. Long trip for a vehicle that ancient. Be a shame if something happened on the way." "Was that a threat?" Lily asked, coming to stand beside her grandmother. Grace's expression was grim. Sounded like one. Cole watched the truck disappear down the driveway. "The Redfords don't make idle warnings." "Why would they care if we compete or not?" Lily wondered aloud. "It's not like Storm is going up against their champion breeds." Cole and Grace exchanged a look, both recognizing there was more at stake than a simple showcase competition. That night, after Cole had left and Lily had gone to bed, Grace sat at her kitchen table cleaning her father's old service revolver. She hadn't touched the weapon in years, but Travis's veiled threat had awakened old instincts. Storm lay nearby, watching her methodical movements with alert eyes. "Just a precaution," she told him softly. "Old habits." As she worked, her mind drifted back to Afghanistan, to the constant vigilance required to survive. She had thought those days were behind her, that the most she would have to fear on the ranch was a rattlesnake or a flooding creek. Now, inexplicably, she found herself preparing for a different kind of threat, one connected to an innocent dog showcase of all things. The pieces didn't fit together. Why would the Redfords care so much about her participation? Why was Cole so invested in helping them? And why did Storm, a half-starved rescue she'd found in a ravine, generate such interest? The next morning, Grace woke before sunrise, her body tense from dreams she couldn't quite remember. Storm was already awake, sitting alert beside her bed. As she dressed, she noticed him repeatedly going to the window, ears forward, sensing something beyond the glass. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, moving to look outside. The pre-dawn light revealed nothing unusual, but Storm's behavior set off warning bells, honed by years in combat zones. Grabbing a flashlight, Grace pulled on her boots and headed outside, Storm close at her side. The ranch was quiet, the only sounds being the distant lowing of a neighbor's cattle and the soft whisper of wind through the cedars. Yet Storm led her purposefully toward the barn, his posture indicating something was amiss. The barn door stood slightly ajar, not how she had left it the night before. Grace paused, listening intently before slowly pushing it open wider. The beam of her flashlight swept across the interior, revealing upended feed buckets and scattered equipment. Moving deeper inside, she found Storm's training gear, slashed, and his food supply contaminated with what appeared to be motor oil. But it was the message spray-painted across the back wall that made her blood run cold. "Withdraw, or the dog won't make it to the ring." Storm growled low in his throat, confirming Grace's suspicion that whoever had done this might still be nearby. She backed out of the barn, scanning the shadows with combat-trained eyes. "Grace," Lily's voice called from the house. "What's going on?" "Stay inside," Grace ordered sharply, her military tone leaving no room for argument. She circled the barn, finding fresh tire tracks leading away from the property. Someone had come and gone while they slept. By the time Cole arrived, responding to Grace's terse phone call, she had documented the vandalism and secured the property as best she could. His face darkened as he surveyed the damage. "This has gone too far," he muttered, examining the slashed equipment. "It's just property," Grace said, though her voice was tight. "We can replace it." "The threat against Storm isn't just anything," Cole countered. "We should report this." Grace gave a short, humorless laugh. "To who? Sheriff Dixon golfs with Chuck Redford every—" Lily, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. "Why are they so afraid of us? We're just a normal dog and a retired veteran. We shouldn't matter to people like the Redfords." Cole and Grace exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "I think," Cole said slowly, "it's time I told you what I suspect about Storm." They gathered at the kitchen table, Storm settling at Grace's feet, as Cole spread out several old photographs and documents. "My father, Jeremiah Cole, ran a specialized breeding program called Celestial Shepherds," he began. "He developed a line of German shepherds known for exceptional intelligence and empathetic response. Dogs that could anticipate their handlers' needs without formal training. They were particularly valuable for trauma support and specialized military work." He slid a photograph across the table. A striking female German shepherd with distinctive markings similar to Storm's. This was his prize breeding female, Celestia. 10 years ago, she was pregnant with a valuable litter when she disappeared during transport to a secure facility. The official story was that there was an accident and all dogs were lost. My father never believed it. He spent his savings searching for her or her puppies, convinced they had been stolen. Eventually, it broke him. He lost his business, his reputation, everything. Lily looked at the photograph, then at Storm. "You think Storm is one of Celestia's puppies? That he's some kind of special service dog?" Cole nodded. "The timing fits, the location fits, his unique abilities fit, and most tellingly, the Redford's reaction fits. Chuck Redford was responsible for transporting Celestia the day she vanished." Grace stared at him. "You're saying Redford stole your father's dog?" "I'm saying something happened that was covered up. I came back to this county to find out what." Cole's expression was grim. "I've been working as a relief vet at various facilities, including occasionally at Redford's, trying to find evidence. Then I saw Storm with you in town, and everything about him screamed Celestial Shepherd." Grace processed this information, her tactician's mind fitting the pieces together. So the showcase isn't about humiliating me, it's about Storm being recognized for what he is. Exactly. If judges identify Storm's bloodline, and they might, some of them knew my father's work, it could raise questions about how a celestial shepherd ended up abandoned in a ravine. Cole leaned forward. It could expose whatever happened 10 years ago. Lily looked between them, her young face serious. So what do we do? Grace sat in silence for a long moment, her hand resting on Storm's head. Finally, she looked up, a familiar determination hardening her features, the same expression she had worn triaging patients under fire. We go to the showcase, she said firmly, but we take precautions. The final week before the showcase passed in a blur of intensified training and security measures. Grace checked and rechecked her truck, installed simple alarms around the property, and never let Storm out of her sight. Cole visited daily, sometimes staying late into the evening to help repair. He brought replacement equipment and special supplements to ensure Storm would be in peak condition. 3 days before they were set to leave, Cole arrived with an unexpected visitor. A tall, thin man in his 60s, with weathered skin and deep-set eyes that carried a haunted quality. His hands, Grace noticed immediately, were those of someone who had worked with animals his entire life. "Grace Whitaker, this is my father, Jeremiah Cole," Cole said, a complex emotion in his voice. "I've told him about Storm." The older man stood uncertainly at the edge of the yard, his gaze fixed on Storm with an intensity that made Grace instinctively protective. But Storm, after a moment's assessment, walked directly to Jeremiah and sat before him, looking up with calm eyes. Jeremiah's hand trembled as he slowly extended it toward Storm. "May I?" he asked Grace, his voice rough with emotion. She nodded, watching carefully as the old man knelt with difficulty and gently ran his hands over Storm's head and neck. Tears filled his eyes as he examined the distinct markings on the dog's chest. "The crescent and star," he whispered. "Celestia's line always carried it, right here." He looked up at Grace, then at his son. "He's one of hers. I'd stake my life on it." "What happened to Celestia?" Grace asked quietly. Pain crossed Jeremiah's face. Chuck Redford happened. He was transporting her to a breeding facility, or so I thought. The next day I got word there'd been an accident on a back road. The transport van was empty when they found it, no sign of Celestia or her tracking chip. Redford claims she must have escaped and been killed by predators. "But you didn't believe that," Cole supplied. "No. Chuck had made offers to buy her before, said her bloodline would complement his breeding program. I always refused. I believed, still believe, he staged the accident and took her. But I could never prove it. By the time I gathered resources for a proper investigation, any evidence was long gone." Jeremiah's hand still rested on Storm's head. "And now, after all this time, her puppies found his way to someone who needed him," Grace finished. Jeremiah nodded, his eyes meeting Grace's with newfound respect. "The dogs from this line, they choose their people as much as people choose them. They have a gift for finding those who need them most." The old man's words resonated deeply with Grace, explaining what she had felt but couldn't articulate. The sense that finding Storm hadn't been mere chance, but something more profound. As they prepared to depart for San Antonio, with both Cole and Jeremiah now fully invested in their success, Grace felt a strange convergence of past and present. Her military training had taught her to be ready for ambushes and unexpected threats. Now those same skills were being deployed for a dog showcase, of all things. A surreal turn of events that would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so serious. The night before their departure, Grace sat on the porch with Storm, watching stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. Tomorrow they would drive into whatever awaited them in San Antonio, carrying not just their own hopes, but the weight of Jeremiah's decade-long quest for justice. "I don't know what's going to happen," she told Storm softly, "but we've survived worse, haven't we?" Storm leaned against her leg, his steady presence the only answer she needed. The sprawling San Antonio Event Center loomed ahead as Grace's truck rumbled down the access road, Storm sitting alert in the passenger seat while Lily peered eagerly from the back. Cole followed close behind in his SUV with Jeremiah, having insisted on forming a small convoy for the 3-hour journey. The precaution had proven wise when Grace spotted a suspicious vehicle tailing them outside of Austin, only to disappear when Cole pulled alongside. "Look at all the trailers," Lily breathed, pointing toward the exhibitor parking area where gleaming custom rigs displayed kennel logos and championship emblems. Grace's weathered pickup and Storm's humble travel crate stood in stark contrast to the luxury surrounding them, drawing curious and often dismissive glances as they claimed their assigned spot in the furthest row. "Registration is in the main hall," Grace said, checking the paperwork Bus Cole had helped her complete. She clipped Storm's lead to his collar. Not the fancy show lead many handlers use, but her father's restored leather lead polished to a warm glow. "Stay close, Lily." They moved through the bustling lot, navigating between professional handlers exercising immaculately groomed dogs and vendors setting up displays of premium equipment. Storm walked calmly at Grace's side, unfazed by the commotion, though his ears swiveled continuously, tracking every sound. His focus occasionally returned to Grace, checking her posture and breathing for signs of distress. Inside the main hall, the sensory assault was immediate. Bright lights, amplified announcements, the mingled scents of perfumes, dogs, and cleaning products. Grace felt her chest tighten, her heart rate accelerating as old defensive instincts kicked in. Too many people, too many unknowns, too many ways for things to go wrong. Her fingers reflexively sought the scar on her arm, a nervous habit Storm had learned to recognize. The German Shepherd immediately pressed against her leg, applying gentle but firm pressure. The physical contact anchored her, giving her something concrete to focus on beyond the swirl of anxiety. Lily moved closer on her other side, creating a buffer between Grace and the crowd. "Miss Whitaker?" A young woman in an event staff uniform approached, clipboard in hand. "You're registered for the service dog exhibition tomorrow at 10 a.m. You'll need to check in at the veterinary station for health clearance and then proceed to stall assignment." Her gaze flicked from Grace's worn clothing to Storm and back, a flicker of doubt crossing her features. "The exhibition category has specific demonstration requirements. Are you familiar with them?" "We are," Cole answered, catching up to them. He offered his hand to the staff member. "Dr. Cole Anderson, consulting veterinarian for Ms. Whitaker. We've prepared according to the guidelines." The woman's demeanor shifted slightly at Cole's professional title. "Of course. Health checks are in the East Wing. Your stall assignment is in Section D, Stall 29. As they followed the signs toward the health check area, Grace noticed a gathering of reporters and photographers surrounding a man in an expensive suit. Chuck Redford stood at the center of attention, gesturing expansively as he showcased an impeccably groomed German Shepherd whose gleaming black and tan coat seemed to shine under the camera lights. "That's Commander," Cole murmured. "Redford's top breeding male, supposedly undefeated in conformation shows." Grace noted the dog's impressive stance and alert expression, but also the handler's tight grip on the lead, and the way Commander's eyes darted nervously when Redford made sudden movements. Beside her, Storm observed the scene with quiet attention, making no sound but studying the other dog intently. Their group had almost passed unnoticed when Redford glanced up, his seamless camera smile faltering as he recognized them. "Well, well," he called out, loud enough for nearby reporters to turn. "Grace Whitaker actually showed up, and with quite an entourage." His eyes narrowed as they landed on Jeremiah, then widened in obvious surprise. "Jeremiah Cole, I heard you'd become a recluse after your breeding program collapsed." The cameras swung toward them, capturing Grace's guarded expression and Storm's composed alertness. Jeremiah stepped forward, standing straighter than he had in days. "Looks like rumors of my retirement were exaggerated, Chuck," the older man replied, his voice steady. "Thought I'd come see what passes for quality these days." A flash of something dangerous crossed Redford's face before he masked it with another smile. "Always the critic, Jeremiah, though I'm surprised to see you lending your expertise to this sort of entry." He gestured dismissively at Storm. "I recognize quality when I see it," Jeremiah answered simply. Redford's gaze shifted to Storm, studying him with greater intensity. "Interesting animal. Reminds me of something, though I can't quite place it." He glanced at Grace. "Where did you say you got him?" "I didn't," Grace replied evenly. A tense silence stretched between them until a reporter broke in with a question for Redford, drawing his attention away. As they continued toward the health check station, Grace noticed Travis watching them from the edge of his father's entourage, his expression uncharacteristically troubled. "That went well," Cole muttered sarcastically. "He recognized something in Storm," Jeremiah said quietly. "Did you see his face?" Grace nodded. "I saw it. Let's get through the health checks and settled in the stall. I don't want to spend any more time exposed than necessary." The veterinary examination proceeded smoothly, with the official veterinarian noting Storm's excellent condition and clear eyes. When he remarked on Storm's unusual level of attentiveness, Cole exchanged a knowing look with Grace but offered no explanation. Stall assignment 29 proved to be in the farthest corner of Section D, away from the premium locations given to championship contenders and professional breeders. "Figures they'd put us in the back," Lily said, surveying the modest space. "Unlike the elaborate setups in the main areas, with custom banners, elaborate grooming stations, and cushioned resting areas, Stall 29 offered only basic amenities, a simple gate, water bowl, and an area for Storm to rest." "It's fine," Grace said, settling their minimal equipment. "Less traffic, more privacy, easier to secure." Cole nodded his understanding. The military strategist in Grace was evident as she quickly assessed sight lines and potential vulnerabilities. "I'll help Jeremiah get set up in the hotel, then bring back dinner for everyone. Will you be all right here?" Grace checked her watch. "Yes, the facility closes to the public at 8:00. We'll use the time to get Storm acclimated to the environment." Once Cole and Jeremiah departed, Grace, Lily, and Storm walked the perimeter of the exhibition hall, memorizing the layout and identifying exits. With her combat-honed instincts, Grace noted security camera positions, staff patterns, and potential choke points. To a casual observer, they might have looked like any handler familiarizing a dog with the space, but Grace was conducting a thorough tactical assessment. "Grandma," Lily said quietly as they passed the premium stalls where handlers were setting up elaborate displays, "everyone's watching us." It was true. As they walked, conversations dimmed and eyes followed their progress. Some gazes were merely curious, but others held dismissive amusement or outright disdain. A handler with an elegant Saluki smirked as they passed, whispering something to her assistant that made them both chuckle behind manicured hands. "Let them look," Grace replied, her voice steady. "They are not a threat, just a distraction." Storm seemed unbothered by the attention, maintaining his position at Grace's left side with perfect composure. His calm presence drew grudging second glances from some of the professional handlers, who recognized discipline when they saw it, regardless of the source. As they rounded the corner near the practice rings, they encountered Travis Redford exercising a young German shepherd on a long lead. He tensed visibly when he spotted them, his eyes darting to nearby exits as if considering retreat. Instead, he squared his shoulders and continued his training exercise, studiously ignoring their presence. Grace would have passed without comment, but Storm suddenly stopped, his attention fixed on Travis with unusual intensity. After a moment's hesitation, the dog took a step toward the younger Redford, ears forward in a non-threatening posture of recognition. "Storm heel," Grace commanded softly, but the German shepherd maintained his focus on Travis. Travis had gone very still, his own dog sitting obediently at his feet. An unreadable expression crossed his face as he met Storm's gaze, something almost like guilt flickering in his eyes. "Your dog," he began, then shook his head as if changing his mind. "Never mind. You should keep him away from the warm-up areas if he can't follow basic commands." "He follows commands just fine," Grace replied. "He just seems to find you interesting for some reason." Travis's jaw tightened. "Well, I'm not." He gathered his dog's lead and strode away quickly, glancing back once with that same troubled expression. "That was weird," Lily observed as they continued their circuit. Grace nodded thoughtfully. Yes, it was. By the time they returned to stall 29, shadows had lengthened across the exhibition hall as evening approached. The facility had quieted somewhat, with many handlers departing for hotels or dinner. Grace settled Storm in the stall with fresh water and began reviewing their demonstration routine for the following day, walking Lily through each sequence with patient precision. "If at any point tomorrow I seem to be struggling," Grace instructed, "you stick to Cole and Jeremiah. Don't try to help me. Storm knows what to do." Lily looked like she wanted to protest, but nodded solemnly. "I understand." Cole returned with sandwiches and news that Jeremiah was resting comfortably at the hotel. As they ate, he provided updates on the exhibition schedule and judging panel. "Thomas Granger is the head judge," he explained. "He's respected, impartial, and, most importantly, knew my father's work well. If anyone will recognize Storm's bloodline, it's Granger." Grace listened attentively, mentally incorporating the information into her approach for the next day. When Cole and Lily left for the hotel around 9:00 p.m., she opted to stay with Storm, setting up a simple cot in the stall despite Cole's offer of the second hotel room. "I sleep better with him nearby," she explained simply. The exhibition center was eerily quiet after hours, with only security guards making occasional rounds. Grace lay on the cot, one hand resting on Storm's back as he dozed beside her, her mind cycling through scenarios and contingency plans. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive, her combat-trained senses hyper-aware in the unfamiliar environment. It was just past midnight when Storm's head lifted sharply, ears pivoting toward the corridor outside their stall. His low growl brought Grace instantly alert, years of military training allowing her to transition from rest to full awareness in seconds. She placed a quieting hand on Storm's shoulder, listening intently. Footsteps, 2 sets, moving with deliberate stealth. Grace silently reached for her cell phone, switching it to silent mode before texting Cole. "Intruders at stall, alert security." Then she moved to a defensive position beside the stall door, Storm at her side, both of them hidden from immediate view of anyone entering. The footsteps paused outside their stall, a whispered conversation too faint to decipher, then the soft scrape of metal as someone manipulated the latch. As the gate began to swing open, Grace remained perfectly still, controlling her breathing the way she had learned to do during night operations in hostile territory. A beam of light swept across the empty cot. "Where are they?" a male voice whispered. "Check behind the door," another responded. As the first figure stepped fully into the stall, Grace moved with decisive precision, using the intruder's momentum against him. A quick strike to the back of the knee, a firm grip on the shoulder, and the man found himself face down on the ground, his flashlight spinning away across the concrete floor. The second intruder lunged forward, something glinting in his hand. Before Grace could intercept him, Storm launched into action, a dark blur of focused power. He didn't bite, but used his body weight to knock the man off balance, pinning him against the wall with disciplined pressure. "Don't move," Grace ordered in her combat medic voice, the tone that had commanded respect in chaotic battlefield conditions. "Security is on the way." The first man struggled to rise, but Grace maintained her hold. "I said don't—" Move. The beam of the fallen flashlight illuminated enough of the scene for Grace to recognize her captives. Not random intruders, but handlers she'd seen earlier with a Redford team. One held what appeared to be a syringe. "What were you planning to do with that?" she demanded, nodding toward the object. "Just following orders," the man gasped, clearly unprepared for the strength and skill of the woman restraining him. "Chuck Redford's orders." Neither man answered, but their silence was confirmation enough. Minutes later, the stall area flooded with light as security personnel arrived, followed closely by Cole, who had apparently been driving back to the center when he received Grace's text. The head of security, a former police officer named Ramirez, listened gravely as Grace explained the situation. "We caught them attempting to enter our stall after hours," she concluded, "and that one was carrying a syringe." She pointed to the object now secured in an evidence bag. The two men maintained they were simply checking on dogs in their care, a claim undermined by their lack of credential badges and the fact that the Redford team's stalls were in a completely different section. When Ramirez found a vial of what appeared to be a sedative in one man's pocket, the excuses fell apart entirely. "We'll hold them until police arrive," Ramirez assured Grace, "and we'll have additional security posted in this section for the remainder of the event." As the security team escorted the would-be saboteurs away, Cole turned to Grace with newfound respect in his eyes. "You handled that impressively." "Afghanistan was good for something, I guess," she replied dryly. "And Storm," Cole added, watching the German shepherd, who had returned to a calm, alert posture at Grace's side. "He didn't overreact or bite, just controlled the threat." "That's what makes him special," Grace said quietly. "He does what's needed, nothing more." By the time the police had taken statements and departed, it was nearly 3:00 a.m. Despite the additional security now posted nearby, Grace found herself too keyed up to sleep, adrenaline and old combat instincts keeping her senses sharp. Storm settled beside her cot, his warm presence a comforting constant in the long hours before dawn. She must have dozed eventually, because she awakened to Lily's voice and sunlight streaming through the high windows of the exhibition hall. "Grandma, are you okay? Cole told me what happened." Grace sat up, automatically assessing her surroundings before responding. Storm was already alert, having positioned himself between the stall entrance and Grace's cot. "We're fine," she assured her granddaughter. "Just a long night." Cole appeared behind Lily, carrying coffee and breakfast. "The exhibition starts in 2 hours," he said. "Jeremiah's saving seats near the judges. How are you feeling?" Grace accepted the coffee gratefully. "Ready?" She looked down at Storm, who met her gaze with steady confidence. "We're both ready." As the exhibition hall filled with spectators and competitors, Grace and Storm prepared quietly in their corner stall. Unlike the frantic grooming and last-minute training happening in other areas, their preparation was calm and methodical. Grace brushed Storm's coat to a subtle shine, checked his collar and lead, and ran through their mental checklist together. "Remember," Cole advised as the time approached, "the judges are looking for the bond between handler and dog, and the dog's ability to perform service tasks under pressure. Storm's natural instincts for your anxiety are his strongest asset. Show them that connection." Grace nodded, her expression composed despite the nervous energy building in her chest. "We will." A loudspeaker announcement called for service dog exhibition participants to proceed to the holding area. Grace took a deep breath, centering herself the way she had before entering combat zones. She felt Storm press against her leg, steadying her with his familiar presence. "Let's go show them what real service looks like," she murmured to him, and together they walked toward the arena, straight-backed and dignified, despite the whispers and stares that followed them. The holding area buzzed with last-minute preparations as handlers reviewed commands and adjusted their professional uniforms. Grace stood quietly among them, Storm at perfect attention beside her. both seemingly oblivious to the curious and often judgmental glances directed their way. "Whitaker and Storm," called an event coordinator, checking names off a list. "You're third in the lineup. Please be ready when called." From their position, Grace could see into the main exhibition ring, where bleachers filled with spectators surrounded a pristine performance area. In a special section near the judges' table sat Lily and Jeremiah, both looking anxious but determined. Chuck Redford occupied a premium box with associates, his expression smug as he surveyed the proceedings. The first two competitors performed admirably, their dogs executing flawless service tasks like retrieving dropped items, opening doors, and responding to medical alert commands. The crowd applauded appreciatively for the polished demonstration. Then the announcer's voice boomed across the arena. "Next in our service dog exhibition, representing stall 29, Grace Whitaker and Storm." A murmur ran through the audience as Grace and Storm entered the ring. Her worn boots and simple clothing stood in stark contrast to the professional attire of previous handlers. Storm walked beside her without a fancy harness, wearing only the restored leather collar and lead that had belonged to Grace's father. As they reached center ring, Grace felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon them. The familiar tightening began in her chest, the prelude to panic that had been her unwelcome companion since Afghanistan. For a moment the bright lights seemed to transform into the blinding desert sun. The murmur of the crowd became radio chatter from a mission gone wrong. Storm sensed the shift immediately. Without command, he pressed firmly against her leg, applying the grounding pressure that had become their unspoken language. Grace's hand moved automatically to his head, the contact anchoring her to the present moment. The head judge, Thomas Granger, nodded for them to begin their demonstration. Grace took a steadying breath and began walking the perimeter of the ring, Storm in perfect heel position. Storm was not trained by professionals, she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed arena. He was found abandoned and injured 5 years ago. What you're about to see are behaviors he developed naturally in response to my needs as a combat veteran with PTSD. This departure from the scripted introductions caught the audience's attention. Even Chuck Redford leaned forward slightly in his seat. Grace continued walking, gradually increasing her pace until she was moving briskly around the ring. Without warning, she stopped suddenly, her posture stiffening and her breathing becoming rapid and shallow, a convincing simulation of the onset of a panic attack. Storm's response was immediate and flawless. He circled to face her, pressing his body against her legs and looking up with unwavering focus. When Grace's hand began to tremble, a genuine response as the simulation triggered real anxiety, Storm nudged it insistently until she placed her palm on his head. The audience watched in silence as dog and handler moved through what was clearly a well-practiced routine. Storm applying calibrated pressure, maintaining eye contact, and gradually guiding Grace to a seated position on a bench at the side of the ring. Once there, he positioned himself across her lap, his weight providing deep pressure therapy that visibly calmed her breathing. It wasn't the traditional service dog demonstration the audience had expected with crisp commands and mechanical responses. Instead, they witnessed something far more intimate and authentic, a genuine partnership forged in mutual need and understanding. As Grace recovered from the simulated attack, she and Storm moved into the second phase of their demonstration. She presented challenges that might trigger anxiety in public. Sudden loud noises, crowded spaces simulated by volunteers who entered the ring, and environmental stressors. Throughout each scenario, Storm remained focused solely on Grace's well-being, anticipating her needs and responding with extraordinary awareness. The final element of their demonstration came without announcement. Grace simply sat on the floor of the ring, apparently overcome by a genuine wave of exhaustion and emotion. Storm immediately positioned himself beside her, creating a protective barrier between her and the audience. Then, in a move that drew audible gasps, he gently placed his paw on her chest, directly over her heart. maintaining steady pressure until her breathing slowed to match his. In that moment of connection, the artifice of the exhibition fell away. The audience wasn't watching a performance, but witnessing a sacred trust between a wounded warrior and the companion who had helped her find her way back to life. When Grace finally stood, Storm at her side, the silence in the arena was profound. Then, beginning with a single person in the back row, applause spread through the crowd, building until it filled the space with thunderous appreciation. Many spectators rose to their feet, some openly wiping away tears. At the judges' table, Thomas Granger was leaning forward intently, his professional detachment giving way to undisguised fascination. His gaze moved from Storm to Grace and back again, his expression suggesting he was seeing far more than just a handler and dog. As Grace and Storm made their way to the exit, she caught sight of Chuck Redford's face, no longer smug but tense with barely contained fury. Beside him, unexpectedly, Travis sat with an expression that might almost have been relief. In the waiting area, Lily flung herself into Grace's arms, bubbling with excitement and pride. "You were amazing, both of you. Did you see how everyone stood up at the end?" Cole approached more sedately, though his eyes shone with vindication. Thomas Granger couldn't take his eyes off Storm. He recognized something. "I'm sure of it." Grace simply nodded, too emotionally drained to formulate a response. The demonstration had taken more out of her than she'd anticipated, blurring the line between simulation and genuine vulnerability. Storm remained pressed against her leg, still on duty despite the completion of their performance. As other competitors continued their demonstrations, Grace retreated to stall 29, needing space to decompress. Storm stayed vigilant, his focus entirely on her recovery. It was there, in the quiet of their humble corner, that Thomas Granger found them an hour later. "Ms. Whitaker," the judge said, his authoritative voice softened with respect, "I'd like to speak with you about your dog." Thomas Granger studied Storm with the practiced eye of someone who had evaluated thousands of dogs throughout his career. His gaze lingered on the distinctive markings on Storm's chest, the precise set of his ears, and the intelligent alertness in his amber eyes. Grace stood quietly, one hand resting lightly on Storm's shoulder, while Lily, Cole, and Jeremiah gathered nearby, tension evident in their postures. "I've been judging dogs for over 30 years, Granger said finally, his voice measured. "In that time, I've seen bloodlines come and go, champions rise and fall, but I've rarely seen the level of intuitive response your dog displayed today." He turned to Jeremiah with a nod of recognition. "Not since the Celestial Shepherd program." A flicker of emotion crossed Jeremiah's weathered face. "You remember my work?" "Of course. Your methods were controversial, breeding for empathetic intelligence rather than conformation standards, but the results were undeniable." Granger returned his attention to Storm. "This dog carries celestial markers, the crescent chest pattern, the cranial structure, the eye set, but more than physical traits, his behavioral patterns are distinctive." He looked at Grace. "May I ask how you came to have him?" Grace recounted finding Storm in Timber Ravine 5 years earlier, describing his condition and the absence of identification. As she spoke, Granger's expression grew increasingly troubled. "The timing aligns with the disappearance of Celestia," he noted, glancing at Jeremiah. "She was carrying a litter when she vanished, if I recall correctly." Jeremiah nodded, his voice tight with old pain. 7 weeks along, the transport was supposedly taking her to a secure whelping facility. Chuck Redford was handling the arrangements. Understanding dawned in Granger's eyes. "And now her offspring appears in your competition, performing at a level that showcases the Celestial breeding program's success." He shook his head slowly. "No wonder Redford tempted to sabotage you. If judges and breeders recognize this dog's lineage, questions will be asked about Celestia's disappearance." "Will you disqualify us?" Lily asked anxiously. "Because Storm doesn't have papers?" Granger's expression softened as he looked at the girl. No, young lady, the service exhibition category judges performance, not pedigree. Your grandmother and Storm have earned their place here. He turned back to Grace. But I should warn you, Chuck Redford has considerable influence in the show circuit. When the preliminary scores are announced this evening, he won't be pleased. The warning proved prophetic. When the day's exhibition results were posted on digital boards throughout the venue, Storm and Grace's names appeared at the top of the service category rankings. A crowd gathered around the displays, buzzing with surprise and admiration. The unknown handler from Stall 29 had outscored professional trainers and established programs. Grace received the news with characteristic reserve, but Lily's jubilant hug broke through her composure, bringing a rare smile to her face. Cole and Jeremiah celebrated more openly, years of waiting for vindication finally bearing fruit. Storm, sensing the positive energy, remained calmly attentive at Grace's side, occasionally accepting gentle praise but never breaking his vigilant watch over her. Their modest celebration in Stall 29 was interrupted by the arrival of Chuck Redford, flanked by 2 security guards. His face was flushed with anger, his expensive suit somehow failing to mask the threatening energy he projected. "This is a farce," he announced without preamble, brandishing a tablet displaying the scores. "You've manipulated the judges with some sob story about military service and rescue dogs. My legal team is already filing a formal protest." Grace faced him squarely, her military bearing evident in her straight spine and level gaze. "The judges scored what they saw. Storm performed honestly." "Did he?" Redford's voice dropped to a dangerous pitch. "Or did Jeremiah Cole coach you on how to showcase his precious bloodline?" His gaze shifted to the older trainer. "Always the puppet master, aren't you, Jeremiah? Couldn't succeed legitimately, so you're using this charity case to try to restore your reputation." Jeremiah stepped forward, years of buried anger surfacing in his trembling hands. "You're the one who can't succeed legitimately, Chuck. You've spent decades buying trophies and intimidating competitors because your breeding program never produced dogs with real intelligence or temperament." Redford's expression darkened further. "Careful, old man. You're in no position to make accusations. Not after your business collapsed under suspicion of unethical breeding practices." "Suspicions you planted," Jeremiah shot back, "after you stole Celestia and couldn't replicate her line's abilities?" The security guard shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain about their role in what had become a deeply personal confrontation. Storm moved closer to Grace, sensing the escalating tension. "Get out," Grace said quietly to Redford. "You've made your protest, now leave." For a moment it seemed Redford might refuse, his body coiled with barely controlled rage. Then his expression shifted to something colder and more calculated. "This isn't over, Whitaker. Not by a long shot." He glanced at Storm with naked avarice. "That dog doesn't belong to you. He never did." After Redford departed, an uneasy silence settled over Stall 29. Cole paced the small space, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "He's going to pull every string he can to discredit you before tomorrow's final round." "Let him try," Grace replied, though concern had etched new lines around her eyes. "We've faced worse." As evening fell, exhibition participants gradually departed for hotels or dinner, leaving the venue quiet save for security personnel making their rounds. Grace insisted on staying with Storm despite Cole's continued offer of the hotel room. "We'll be fine here," she assured him. "After last night's attempt, security is watching this section closely." Reluctantly, Cole, Jeremiah, and Lily left for the hotel, promising to return early the next morning. Grace settled onto her cot, Storm curled protectively at her side. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to Redford's parting words. "That dog doesn't belong to you. He never did." The threat behind the statement was unmistakable. She must have drifted off eventually, because the next thing she knew, Storm was on his feet, hackles raised as he emitted a low, warning growl. Grace was instantly alert, years of battlefield readiness allowing her to transition from sleep to full awareness in seconds. The stall was dark, but Storm's focus was directed toward the corridor, where footsteps approached with deliberate slowness. Grace reached for her phone to alert security, only to find it unresponsive, dead, despite having been charged earlier. The footsteps paused outside their stall. Grabbing Storm's lead, Grace positioned herself in the shadows, prepared to defend against another sabotage attempt. The stall door opened slowly, and a figure slipped inside. In the dim emergency lighting, Grace recognized Travis Redford's silhouette. Storm's growl deepened. "Wait," Travis whispered urgently. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Could have fooled me," Grace replied evenly, not relaxing her guard. "Why are you here, Travis?" He glanced nervously toward the corridor. "To warn you. My father. He's not just filing a protest. He's filing a theft claim against you, claiming Storm is his property. He has paperwork, registration documents showing Storm as offspring of one of his breeding females." "Virch paperwork," Grace said, the pieces falling into place. "That's why he tried to keep us out of the showcase, not just to protect his reputation, but to maintain his claim on Storm's bloodline." Travis nodded miserably. He's been obsessed with the Celestial program for years. When Celestia disappeared, he thought he could recreate the line with the puppies, but he hesitated, then continued in a rush. The transport accident wasn't planned. It was real. The van crashed in a storm, and Celestia escaped into the wilderness. My father searched for weeks but couldn't find her. Grace processed this information, her tactician's mind analyzing its implications. "But he found one of her puppies, Storm." "Yes. 3 years after the accident, one of our hunting parties spotted a German shepherd near Timber Ravine. My father was convinced it was one of Celestia's offspring. He could see the markings even from a distance. He sent men to capture the dog, but a storm hit and they lost track of him." Travis swallowed hard. 2 years later, I was hunting alone in the same area when flash floods hit. I was trapped on a ledge, water rising, no way to call for help. Understanding dawned in Grace's eyes. "Storm found you." Travis nodded, emotion making his voice rough. "He appeared out of nowhere, somehow got me to grab his collar and pulled me to higher ground. He stayed with me until the waters receded enough for me to find my way back." He looked at Storm with undisguised gratitude. "I never told my father. I knew what he'd do if he found the dog." "And now he has found him," Grace said grimly. "Yes, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. The final exhibition round is tomorrow morning. My father has arranged for animal control officers to be present with the ownership documents. They'll see Storm immediately afterward, regardless of the results." Travis's expression was haunted. "I owe this dog my life. I can't let that happen." Grace's mind raced through options, each one leading to a dead end. Without Storm's original documentation, impossible to obtain since he was born in the wild after Celestia's escape, she had no legal way to counter Redford's forged paperwork. Even with Jeremiah and Cole's testimony, the process would take months, during which Storm would remain in Redford's custody. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked Travis. He met her gaze steadily. "Because you need to leave, tonight. Take Storm and go, somewhere my father can't find you." The suggestion hit Grace like a physical blow. Leave the competition after coming so far? Abandon the chance to fully vindicate Jeremiah and expose Redford's deception? Yet the alternative, losing Storm to a man who viewed him only as breeding stock, was unthinkable. After Travis departed, Grace sat in the darkness, Storm's head heavy on her lap as she stroked his fur mechanically. The dog sensed her distress, pressing closer as if to reassure her of his presence. How many times had he anchored her this way? How many nights had his steady warmth been the only thing standing between her and the abyss of her memories? The thought of running felt like failure, like surrendering to the same forces that had driven her into isolation after returning from Afghanistan. Yet staying meant gambling with Storm's future, perhaps his very life. Redford had already demonstrated his willingness to harm the dog to protect his secrets. Tears slipped down Grace's weathered cheeks as the weight of the decision pressed upon her. Storm shifted, rising to place his paws on her shoulders, a behavior he had developed during her worst panic attacks when the pressure helped ground her in reality. His amber eyes met hers in the darkness, steady and trusting. "What do we do, boy?" she whispered, her voice catching. For once the answer wasn't clear, the path forward obscured by legal complications and the raw power of wealthy men like Chuck Redford. Grace's phone remained dead, preventing her from reaching Cole or Jeremiah for advice. Alone in the darkened stall, she felt the familiar closing sensation in her chest, the tightening that preceded full-blown panic. The exhibition hall seemed to shrink around her, its walls transforming in her mind to the confines of a field hospital under attack, the distant sounds of the venue's night staff becoming the approach of enemy combatants. Storm recognized the signs immediately, increasing the pressure of his body against hers, licking her hand insistently until she focused on the sensation. But this time the panic was too strong, fueled by the very real threat of losing him. Images flashed before her, the ravine where she'd found him, the nights he'd woken her from nightmares. Lily's face brightening as she watched them train together. As dawn broke over the exhibition center, it found Grace still awake, hollow-eyed and haunted. Storm hadn't left her side all night, maintaining contact as she cycled through waves of panic and grief. The decision she had reached sat heavy in her chest, a leaden weight of inevitability. When Cole arrived with coffee and breakfast, he took one look at her face and knew something was terribly wrong. "What happened?" he demanded, setting down the food and crouching beside her. In a flat voice, Grace relayed Travis's warning and the impossible choice before her. Cole's expression darkened as he listened, anger and frustration evident in the tight set of his jaw. "So, that's it? Redford wins?" he asked when she finished. Grace looked down at Storm, who remained pressed against her leg, steady and present as always. "He wins the legal battle, for now. But he doesn't win Storm." Her voice strengthened with resolve. "We'll withdraw from the final round and leave before the animal control officers arrive." "No." The voice came from the stall entrance, where Lily stood with tears streaming down her face. She had arrived in time to hear Grace's decision. "You can't give up, not after everything you've shown everyone about what Storm can do." "Lily," Grace said gently, "sometimes surviving is more important than winning. If Redford gets custody of Storm, he'll never let us near him again. He'll use him for breeding, nothing more." The girl's shoulders slumped in defeat, her young face crumpling. "It's not fair," she whispered. "You two deserve to finish what you started." Grace rose stiffly, her body aching from the sleepless night. "Life rarely gives us what we deserve, Lily. It gives us challenges, and we make the best choices we can with what we have." She reached for Storm's lead, her movements deliberate and final. "I'm going to pack our things. We need to be gone within the hour." As Cole helped her gather their meager belongings, Grace felt a hollow space opening inside her chest, the familiar void of loss that had been her companion since Afghanistan. She had come to the showcase seeking validation, perhaps even redemption. Instead, she was leaving in defeat, running once again from forces beyond her control. Storm sensed her despair, pressing closer as they prepared to depart. Even in this darkest moment, he remained her steadfast guardian, asking nothing but to remain by her side. His unwavering loyalty only deepened the ache of their impending flight. "I bring the truck around to the service entrance," Cole said quietly. "Less chance of being seen that way." Grace nodded, her jaw set in grim determination. As Cole left to retrieve the vehicle, she knelt beside Storm, taking his noble face between her scarred hands. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought we could win this one." Storm's response was to lean forward and gently lick a tear from her cheek, his eyes never leaving hers. In that silent exchange was everything they had built together: trust, healing, and an unbreakable bond that transcended ownership papers and legal claims. It was in this moment of profound connection that Jeremiah Cole appeared at the stall entrance, his face transformed by a fierce determination that belied his age. "Don't you dare leave," he said firmly. "Not yet." Grace looked up, Storm still cradled in her hands. "We don't have a choice, Jeremiah. Redford has the legal advantage." The old trainer's eyes gleamed with a knowledge he seemed reluctant to share. "There's something you need to see first. Something that might change everything." Jeremiah stood in the doorway of stall 29, weathered hands clutching a battered leather portfolio. The early morning light cast deep shadows across his face, emphasizing the determined set of his jaw. Behind him, Cole appeared, confusion evident in his expression as he looked between his father and Grace. "What's going on?" Cole asked. "I thought we were leaving." "Not yet," Jeremiah repeated, stepping fully into the stall. He placed the portfolio on Grace's cot and carefully unbuckled its worn straps. "All these years I thought these papers were useless, painful reminders of what I'd lost. But now—" His hands trembled slightly as he extracted several yellowed documents, spreading them reverently on the makeshift bed. Grace approached cautiously, Storm at her side. "What are these?" "Insurance," Jeremiah replied, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "When you breed dogs for as long as I have, you learn to document everything." He pointed to the top document, a faded certificate with official seals. "This is Celestia's registration with the International Working Dog Database, including her DNA profile and microchip number." Cole leaned closer, his eyes widening. "Dad, you never mentioned you had these." "I couldn't bear to look at them after she disappeared. They stayed locked away until last night, when I remembered something crucial." Jeremiah tapped another document bearing complex diagrams and handwritten notes. "This is Celestia's breeding chart, including genetic markers specific to her line. But more importantly," he slid forward a third document, "this is the transport manifest from the day she vanished, with Chuck Redford's signature acknowledging receipt of a pregnant dog and accepting full liability for her safety." Understanding dawned in Grace's eyes. "So if Storm is Celestia's offspring, then Redford was legally responsible for him from the moment he signed this document," Jeremiah confirmed. "His claim of ownership is valid only if he can prove he fulfilled his duty of care, but we know he didn't, because you found Storm abandoned and injured." Cole studied the papers, his professional demeanor giving way to cautious hope. "It's circumstantial, without DNA confirmation, but it might be enough to delay any seizure attempt." Lily, who had been listening intently from the doorway, stepped forward. "Can we get Storm tested, prove he's Celestia's son?" "Easy. DNA testing takes time," Cole explained gently. "Days at minimum." "We don't need days," Jeremiah said, a spark of the formerly renowned trainer showing through his aged exterior. "We need hours. Just enough to complete the final exhibition round and put Storm's abilities on public display. Once people see what he can do, what the Celestial line was truly capable of, Redford won't be able to hide behind paperwork and influence." Grace remained skeptical. "Even with these documents, Redford has connections. Animal control will still take Storm if he pushes hard enough." A new voice entered the conversation from the stall entrance. "Not if someone with first-hand knowledge testified against him." All heads turned to find Travis Redford standing there, uncharacteristically subdued in jeans and a plain button-down shirt rather than his usual flashy attire. The younger Redford shifted uncomfortably under their collective gaze but held his ground. "What are you doing here?" Cole demanded, moving protectively toward Storm. Travis held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I told you last night, Grace. I owe this dog my life." He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "And I'm prepared to testify about what really happened with Celestia." The atmosphere in the small stall crackled with tension as Travis stepped closer. Storm watched him intently, but without aggression, his posture alert but not threatening. "My father didn't plan for the transport van to crash," Travis began, addressing Jeremiah directly. "But when it did and Celestia escaped into the wilderness, he saw an opportunity. Instead of reporting it honestly, he claimed all dogs in transport were lost. He spent months searching Timber Ravine secretly, hoping to find Celestia or her puppies without anyone knowing." Jeremiah's hands clenched into fists. "I spent everything I had searching for her. If I had known she was alive—" "I know," Travis interrupted, genuine regret in his voice. "I was 17 when it happened. I didn't understand what my father was doing, the lines he was crossing." He looked at Storm, something like reverence in his expression. 3 years ago, one of our hunting parties spotted what they believed was a celestial descendant near the ravine. My father became obsessed with capturing it, but the dog always eluded them." Grace's jaw tightened as the pieces aligned with her own timeline. "Until I found him after that big storm 5 years ago?" Travis nodded. 2 years after the sightings began, yes, and a year before that." He hesitated, vulnerability replacing his usual arrogance. "I was checking hunting blinds alone when flash floods hit the ravine area. I got trapped on a rock outcropping with water rising fast. No cell service, no way to call for help." His voice grew quieter, touched with wonder. "That's when this dog appeared. Somehow he got to my position, let me grab his collar, and pulled me to higher ground. He stayed with me through the night until the waters receded." Travis looked directly at Storm. "He saved my life, and I repaid him by saying nothing when my father continued hunting for him." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Storm's soft exhale as he stepped forward to sniff Travis's outstretched hand, a gesture of recognition that brought tears to the young man's eyes. "Why come forward now?" Cole asked, still suspicious. Travis straightened, something resolute hardening in his face. "Because last night I overheard my father arranging more than just animal control. He's hired men to create a disturbance during the final exhibition, something that would trigger a PTSD episode for Grace. He wants to publicly discredit your performance, make it look like Storm is dangerous or unpredictable." Grace's expression remained impassive, but her hand moved automatically to Storm's head, finding reassurance in his solid presence. "And you're willing to stand against your father? Publicly?" "Yes." The simple affirmation carried the weight of years of complicity and regret. "It's time someone did." For the first time since Travis's arrival, Lily spoke up. "We only have 2 hours until the final round. What's the plan?" 5 sets of eyes turned to Grace, who stood silent for a long moment, weighing options with the careful calculation of someone accustomed to life or math decisions. Finally, she straightened her shoulders, military bearing returning to her posture. "We compete," she said simply. "But we adjust our routine to showcase Storm's intuitive response to crisis situations, make it impossible for anyone to dismiss what they're seeing." She looked at Travis. "And we need you positioned where you can intervene if your father's plan goes into motion." As Grace outlined her strategy, a new energy filled the small stall, the focused determination of people united against a common adversary. Even Storm seemed to sense the shift, his alert posture taking on an air of readiness. By the time the final exhibition round was announced, the main arena was packed to capacity. Word had spread about the extraordinary performance by the unknown handler and her rescue dog, drawing spectators and media who might otherwise have ignored the service dog category. Grace could feel the weight of expectation as she and Storm waited in the staging area, surrounded by the final competitors, all professional handlers with impeccably trained dogs. "Nervous?" asked a handler with a sleek Labrador in an embroidered service vest. Grace shook her head slightly. "Focused." The woman studied her with newfound respect. "Your routine yesterday was different, more real than what most of us do." "It is real," Grace replied quietly, "for both of us." Before the conversation could continue, the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, calling the first finalists. Grace watched the competitors perform their polished routines, each one technically impressive but somehow lacking the raw connection she and Storm shared. She spotted Cole and Lily in the stands, Jeremiah beside them with his leather portfolio open on his lap. Thomas Granger sat at the judges' table, his expression professionally neutral as he evaluated each performance. In the premium box section, Chuck Redford held court with several associates, his expansive gestures and confident smile suggesting a man without concerns. Only the occasional glance toward the staging area betrayed his awareness of Grace's continued presence. Travis was nowhere to be seen. Final competitor in our service dog exhibition, from stall 29, Grace Whitaker and Storm. Taking a deep breath, Grace led Storm into the arena. The applause that greeted them was stronger than she had expected, suggesting their previous performance had resonated with the audience. Storm walked confidently at her side, his focus unwavering despite the crowd and cameras. They began with standard service dog tasks, retrieving dropped items, opening a practice door, and demonstrating basic medical alert responses. Storm performed flawlessly, moving with a fluid grace that contrasted with the more mechanical precision of earlier competitors. But it was the transition to the specialized PTSD response routine that Grace knew would make or break their chances. Standing in the center of the arena, she subtly scanned the crowd, looking for any sign of the disruption Travis had warned about. Nothing seemed amiss, but years in combat zones had taught her that threats often appeared from the most unexpected quarters. "Storm's primary function, as my service dog," she announced clearly, "is to help manage post-traumatic stress disorder resulting from my military service. What you're about to see are authentic response patterns he developed naturally, without formal training." Grace began walking the perimeter of the arena, maintaining a calm pace as she had in their previous demonstration. Storm matched her stride for stride, occasionally glancing up to check her expression. They had nearly completed a full circuit when a sharp metallic crash echoed through the arena as a equipment rack toppled near the judges' table. The sound, eerily similar to the distinctive clatter of weapons being readied, triggered an immediate physiological response in Grace. Her heart rate spiked, her breathing shortened, and the familiar tunnel vision of an impending flashback began to close in. This was no simulation. The carefully orchestrated disruption had achieved its intended effect. But what Redford hadn't counted on was Storm's genuine ability to detect and respond to Grace's distress. Before the flashback could fully take hold, the German Shepherd moved decisively into her line of sight, pressing firmly against her legs and issuing a soft whine that cut through the beginning haze of panic. His amber eyes locked onto hers, unwavering and grounding. The crowd watched in hushed amazement as dog and handler worked through what was clearly a real episode. Storm's responses were precise yet nuanced, adjusting pressure and position based on subtle cues from Grace that even experienced handlers might have missed. When Grace's hand began to tremble visibly, Storm guided her to a nearby bench, positioned himself across her lap, and applied deep pressure therapy with his body weight. The intimacy of the moment was palpable. This was no rehearsed demonstration, but a genuine lifeline being extended between two beings who had learned to navigate trauma together. As Grace's breathing steadied under Storm's watchful attention, a profound silence fell over the arena. Then from the judges' table, Thomas Granger rose to his feet, applauding with unconcealed admiration. One by one, spectators followed suit until the entire arena thundered with approval. Even competing handlers stood in respectful recognition of what they had witnessed. Only Chuck Redford remained seated, his face contorted with fury as his planned disruption achieved the opposite of its intended effect. He signaled urgently to someone at the back of the arena, presumably the animal control officers prepared to seize Storm after the performance. Grace noticed the movement and tensed, but before she could react, Travis emerged from behind the judge's table, Jeremiah's portfolio in hand. He approached the head judge directly, speaking with intense focus as he presented the documents. Granger's expression shifted from confusion to grave understanding as he reviewed the papers. The announcer's voice, somewhat uncertain, came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation that requires the judge's attention. Please remain seated while we address this matter." Grace and Storm remained at the center of the arena, a strange calm settling over them despite the unfolding drama. Storm hadn't broken his focused attention on Grace for a moment, still performing his service duties even amid the commotion. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity as Granger conferred with other officials, Travis standing firm beside them. Finally, the head judge approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his authoritative voice commanding immediate attention, "extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary measures. It has come to the judge's attention that there are serious questions regarding the ownership and history of the dog known as Storm." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Granger continued. "Mr. Chuck Redford has filed a claim of ownership asserting that Storm is descended from his breeding program and was unlawfully obtained by Miss Whitaker." He paused, his gaze finding Chuck in the premium box. "However, we have been presented with documentation suggesting that Storm is actually descended from the Celestial Shepherd line, developed by Jeremiah Cole, and that Mr. Redford may have been involved in irregularities surrounding the disappearance of the breeding female Celestia 10 years ago." The murmur became a buzz of shocked reactions. Chuck Redford surged to his feet, his face flushed with rage. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "Those documents are forgeries. That dog is my property." "Actually, Father," Travis's voice rang out as he stepped forward, "I've provided sworn testimony about your actions following Celestia's disappearance, including your knowledge that Storm saved my life 3 years ago in Timber Ravine." A collective gasp went through the audience. Chuck stared at his son with naked betrayal. "You ungrateful—" "And," Travis continued, cutting him off, "I've confirmed your plans to disrupt today's exhibition specifically to trigger Ms. Whitaker's PTSD. The police are currently questioning the men you hired to create the disturbance." The arena erupted in outraged chatter. Several people in the premium box edged away from Chuck, unwilling to be associated with such tactics. Grace remained beside Storm, one hand steadying herself on his solid presence as the truth unfolded before hundreds of witnesses. Thomas Granger raised his hands for quiet. "In light of these serious allegations and pending further investigation, we are temporarily suspending any ownership claims against Storm. He will remain in Ms. Whitaker's care until this matter is legally resolved." He turned to Grace with undisguised respect. "Furthermore, based on the extraordinary demonstration we have witnessed today, the judges unanimously award first place in the service dog exhibition to Grace Whitaker and Storm." The announcement triggered a fresh wave of applause, drowning out Chuck Redford's continued protests. As security personnel moved toward the premium box, presumably to escort the disruptive Redford from the premises, Grace knelt beside Storm, pressing her forehead briefly against his. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "We stood our ground." Storm's response was to lick her cheek once, his steady gaze saying more than words ever could. Together they walked toward the exit where Lily, Cole, and Jeremiah waited, with tear-streaked faces and triumphant smiles. Near the arena entrance, Travis Redford stood alone, his expression a complex mixture of relief and uncertainty. As Grace and Storm approached, he straightened, as if preparing for judgment. "Thank you," Grace said simply, extending her hand. Travis shook it, his grip firm despite his evident emotion. "I should have spoken up years ago." "You're speaking now," she replied. "That's what matters." As they left the arena, reporters called out questions, cameras flashed, and spectators reached to congratulate them. Through it all, Storm remained steadfast at Grace's side, navigating the chaos with the same calm certainty that had saved them both in very different ways. Outside in the Texas sunshine, Grace took a deep breath of fresh air, the weight of secrets and threats finally lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, she felt something like peace settling over her. Not the fragile calm of isolation, but the earned serenity of having faced her demons and emerged victorious. Storm pressed against her leg, a silent reminder of the partnership that had made it all possible. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, each the other's guardian and guide through the battlefield of healing. 1 year later, the sign at the entrance to what had once been Whitaker Ranch creaked gently in the warm Texas breeze. Freshly painted in rich blue and gold, it read, "Whitaker Cole Canine Training Center, where healing hearts find their way home." The weathered fence line had been replaced with sturdy new posts, and the once sagging barn stood tall again, its red paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. Where there had once been only drought-resistant weeds and hard-packed dirt, vibrant green grass now spread across training areas and rest spaces for both dogs and humans. Grace surveyed the transformation from the wide porch of the ranch house, Storm at her side as always. At 60, her face still carried the lines etched by war and hardship, but something had softened in her gaze. She wore her gray hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and though her clothes remained practical, and they no longer hung on her frame as if she were disappearing into herself, today she stood straight-backed and present, one hand resting lightly on Storm's head. "Grandma!" Lily's voice called from the training yard where half a dozen people worked with their dogs. At 16, she had blossomed in the year since the showcase, her quiet shyness giving way to confident expertise as she guided veterans through basic handling exercises. "The McGrady group is here for their first session," Grace acknowledged with a nod, watching as a van with VA hospital markings pulled into the parking area. 4 men and 2 women emerged, each bearing visible and invisible wounds of military service. Some moved with the halting gait of those adjusting to prosthetics. Others carried the hypervigilant posture of those for whom civilian life remained a minefield of triggers. All wore expressions Grace recognized all too well, the wary hope of those who had been promised healing before, only to be disappointed. "Ready to meet them?" she murmured to Storm. The German Shepherd, now 7 years old, but still powerfully built and alert, looked up at her with steady amber eyes. Together, they descended the porch steps and crossed the yard with unhurried purpose. "Welcome to Whitaker Cole," Grace greeted the newcomers, her voice carrying the calm authority that had once directed medical evacuations under fire. "I'm Grace Whitaker. This is Storm." She didn't offer to shake hands, a deliberate choice based on years of her own aversion to unexpected touch. "Before we introduce you to the dogs you'll be working with, I'd like Storm to say hello." The veterans exchanged uncertain glances, but Grace simply waited, allowing them space to respond at their own pace. Finally, a woman with burn scars covering one side of her face spoke up. "Nina Perez, Marines, 2 tours in Iraq." Her voice was rough, whether from injury or emotion wasn't clear. "They said this program is different from other service dog training. How?" Grace appreciated the directness of the question. "Storm wasn't trained to help me," she explained. "He figured it out on his own because he recognized what I needed. Here, we don't train dogs to perform tasks. We foster connections between dogs and veterans so they can learn from each other." She gestured toward Storm. "Would you like to meet him?" Nina hesitated, then nodded. Storm approached with calm deliberation, stopping a respectful distance away until the veteran extended her hand. He sniffed it gently, then moved closer, his body language relaxed but attentive. "He's not what I expected," Nina admitted, carefully stroking Storm's head. "Most service dogs I've seen are so formal." "That's the difference," Grace confirmed. "Storm isn't a tool or a medical device. He's a partner." As Storm continued greeting each veteran in turn, Cole emerged from the training barn, clipboard in hand. At 36, the veterinarian had grown into his role as the center's medical director, overseeing the health of their growing pack of rescue and purpose-bred dogs. His relationship with his father had healed alongside the dogs they now worked with together, the old bitterness replaced by collaborative respect. "The kennels are ready for the new arrivals," Cole reported to Grace. "Dad's bringing them over from the Rescue Assessment Center now." Grace nodded, watching as Storm finished his introductions and returned to her side. The German Shepherd's intuitive ability to gauge each veteran's comfort level hadn't dimmed with age, or his elevated status as the center's inspiration. He remained, fundamentally, a dog who understood pain and recognized healing, qualities that couldn't be trained or manufactured. "Let's head to the main training area," Grace directed the group. "Today is just about meeting potential matches. No pressure to make decisions or begin formal work." As they walked, Nina fell into step beside Grace. "I read about what happened at the showcase last year," she said quietly. "About Redford, and how he tried to take Storm away." Grace's expression remained neutral, though the memory still carried an edge. The months following the showcase had brought investigations, depositions, and eventually charges against Chuck Redford for fraud, animal cruelty, and criminal conspiracy. The evidence Travis provided, combined with Jeremiah's documentation and testimony from former Redford employees, had resulted in the dismantling of his breeding operation and a substantial fine. Though he had avoided jail time through expensive legal maneuvering, his reputation in the dog world was irreparably shattered. "That's in the past," Grace replied simply. "What matters is what we've built since." What they had built was remarkable by any standard. Following the showcase and the media attention it generated, donations had flowed in from across the country. Veterans organizations, impressed by the authentic approach to PTSD support, offered partnerships and referrals. Jeremiah contributed his expertise in breeding and training, while Cole provided medical oversight that ensured all dogs in the program received exceptional care. Most surprisingly, perhaps, was Travis Redford's involvement. After testifying against his father, he had found himself adrift, cut off from family resources, but finally free of toxic influence. He had arrived at Whitaker Ranch 3 months after the showcase, offering to volunteer with the basic maintenance the expanding program required. Now he ran operations management for the center, his business acumen redirected toward healing rather than profit. In the main training arena, Jeremiah waited with 6 dogs of various breeds and sizes. At 68, the former breeder had regained much of his vigor, his expertise finally finding worthy application in matching rescued dogs with veterans who needed them. He acknowledged the new group with a nod, his weathered face creasing in a warm smile. "These fellows are ready to meet you," he announced, indicating the dogs who sat calmly nearby. "Each has been carefully evaluated for temperament and intuitive response. Unlike traditional service animals, these dogs weren't selected for obedience alone, but for their capacity to form genuine connections." Grace watched as the veterans cautiously approached the dogs, their guardedness gradually easing as Jeremiah guided introductions. Storm remained at her side, his attention divided between monitoring her well-being and observing the new partnerships taking shape. His legacy extended beyond his own service to Grace. He had become the model for an entirely new approach to healing. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't found him that night?" Cole asked, joining Grace at the edge of the arena. She considered the question, her mind drifting back to that storm-lashed evening when she had walked into the wilderness with no intention of returning. The memory no longer carried the sharp edge of despair it once had, softened by the years of healing that followed her decision to save a wounded dog rather than end her own suffering. "Sometimes," she admitted. But Storm would say that's dwelling in the past instead of living in the present. Cole smiled, recognizing the subtle humor that had gradually emerged in Grace's personality over the past year. He's a wise dog. A good dog, Grace corrected, who found someone who needed him as much as he needed them. As the afternoon progressed, the new veterans began forming tentative bonds with their potential partners. Nina, the Marine with burn scars, sat quietly beside a gentle Labrador mix, her guarded expression softening as the dog rested his head on her knee. A former Army Ranger with a prosthetic leg found himself laughing for the first time in months when an energetic Border Collie brought him a training toy, insistently nudging him to play. Lily joined Grace as they observed the sessions, her clipboard filled with notes about the emerging connections. "They're doing better than the last group," she observed. "Opening up faster. They know they're not alone," Grace replied. "That makes all the difference." The setting sun cast long shadows across the training yard as the day's sessions concluded. Veterans departed with scheduled return visits, each carrying pamphlets about the center's approach and photographs of their potential canine partners. Grace watched the van pull away, Storm leaning gently against her leg in what had become their familiar stance of shared support. Travis approached, wiping his hands on a rag after finishing the day's maintenance tasks. "The new housing units will be ready next week," he reported. "We'll be able to accommodate overnight stays for the veterans who travel from farther away." "Good," Grace nodded. "The sooner they can spend extended time with the dogs, the better." Travis's gaze drifted to Storm. "Has there been any word on the breeding program?" The question referred to the careful genetic testing that had confirmed Storm's lineage as a direct descendant of Celestia. With Jeremiah's guidance, they had established a small, ethical breeding program to preserve the extraordinary intuitive traits of the Celestial Shepherd line, with Storm serving as the foundation's sire. His first puppies, now 6 months old, already showed remarkable empathetic response. "The first training assessments are promising," Grace answered, "but we're proceeding carefully. These dogs aren't meant to be mass-produced." Travis nodded his understanding. His journey from entitled heir to humble contributor had taught him the value of patience and integrity, lessons he continued to learn from Storm and Grace daily. As the center's staff dispersed for the evening, Grace and Storm took their customary walk along the perimeter of the property. The routine had begun during her darkest days, when vigilant boundary checks were the only thing that made her feel secure. Now it served as a peaceful transition between work and rest, a moment to reflect on progress made and challenges still ahead. They paused at the highest point of the ranch, where the view extended across rolling Texas hills to the distant horizon. The setting sun painted the landscape in amber and gold, catching in Storm's fur and illuminating the silver in Grace's hair. In comfortable silence, they surveyed what they had built together. Not just a training center, but a community of healing, a place where broken pieces could be gathered and reassembled into something whole. Storm sat beside Grace, his steady presence a constant in a world that had once seemed unbearably chaotic. She placed her hand on his head, feeling his solid warmth beneath her palm. "Good boy," she murmured, the simple phrase carrying the weight of all they had overcome together. As twilight deepened around them, they turned back toward the lights of the ranch house, where Lily waited with dinner, where photographs of their journey lined the walls, and where the nightmares came less frequently with each passing month. They walked unhurried through the gathering dusk, two warriors who had found their way home together. In the soft evening air, the sign at the entrance to Whitaker Cole Canine Training Center caught the last rays of sunlight, its message a promise to all who passed through its gates. Here, healing hearts find their way home. It was a promise Grace and Storm renewed each day, for themselves and for every wounded soul who followed the path they had forged through darkness into light. In the twilight of our lives, it's easy to believe our greatest contributions are behind us, that our scars, both visible and hidden, define our limitations rather than our capacity for renewal. but Grace and Storm's journey reminds us that healing doesn't have a timeline, and purpose can find us when we least expect it. Like Grace, many of us carry the weight of the past, service to country, loss of loved ones, dreams deferred. We may walk through our days feeling unseen, our value questioned by a world that often celebrates youth and novelty over experience and resilience. Yet consider this truth: your deepest wounds may be the very source of your greatest gift to others. The battles you've survived, the losses you've endured, these are not merely scars to hide, but wisdom to share. There is someone who needs precisely what you've learned through suffering. Remember, it's never too late to find your storm, that purpose that recognizes your worth when you've forgotten it yourself. Your story isn't over. Sometimes the most meaningful chapters begin when we think the book is closing. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.